What's up YouTube, this is Gresnick, and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we'll be reacting to Film Theory, the real reason why there's so many live-action remakes. I don't really know why. That's why I'm watching this video, obviously. But, as always, like and subscribe to the Film Theorist and myself, and let's get into this. Alright.
Why are there so many live-action remakes? Lilo and Stitch, How to Train Your Dragon, Snow White, Mufasa, The Little Mermaid. Why are the studios making these when it seems like no one even wants them? Well, the truth is, they've kind of been making them all along, and we just didn't realize it. Hello Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that's going to be remaking all of our popular old theories starring The Rock, Jack Black, and Tom Holland. So subscribe if you want to see that. No, not really, but can you imagine if we did that? So I'm sure a lot of you have noticed what seems like an uptick in live-action adaptations of animated classics, especially in the last 10 years or so, right? It seems like every single quarter, Disney is pumping out one of these things. Some pretty good, and some not. They're also getting crazy with how quickly they're making things. Like, did you know that they're making a live-action Moana movie to release next year, just 10 years after the original? Now, you and I might look at that and let out a really long sigh just thinking about it, but these movies probably aren't going away. Yes, if you just look at this year's Snow White, how it failed, and Disney reconsidering some projects because of it, you might think that they're gonna slow down. But then Lilo and Stitch came out and destroyed the box office during Memorial Day, followed by DreamWorks and Universal also getting into the mix by remaking one of their animated films, How to Train Your Dragon, and it also being a franchise best performer. These movies are absolutely going to keep coming, and
Oh yeah, no, How to Train Your Dragon's such a good movie series. There's no way I think the live action looks really good. I just don't like how Tooth looks so cartoony still while the rest of the dragons look so realistic. They really should have been more consistent. I'm still fine with it. The movie still looks good. I love those movies. Even if they're just able to do a normal non-live action remake, I'd be pretty happy.
I want to figure out why. Why are there so many gosh darn live-action remakes? Now, there might be a lot of reasons to contribute to that. Like, for example, there's oftentimes a stigma that cartoons are for kids, and more people are willing to watch a live-action project than an animated one. That's stupid, but it is true. And the most obvious answer here is that these studios keep making these movies because, well, people will go see them. They make money. And in a lot of ways, these live-action remakes are taking on the same role that direct-to-DVD sequels or cartoon spin-offs did in the past. Think stuff like Aladdin 2 or Hercules the Animated Series, ways to eke out just a bit more money from an IP. Yeah, corporate greed is yet again a driving force behind a lot of these decisions, but I want to take it a step further. Why do these make money? Why do people keep going to see them? Well, loyal theorists, this is a very broad topic with a lot of answers, but I think I figured it out. I think I've narrowed the reasoning down for these studios, and if we know those reasons, I think we can make some real change here. No, these remakes are probably not going away anytime soon, but at the very least, we can guide these studios towards making ones that might actually be kind of cool. So grab your popcorn, friends. Let's dig in. So to really break down the reasoning here, I think we need some background about how this entire trend actually started, because funnily enough, Disney kinda stumbled into the success of these films. Sure, there had always been a couple mildly successful remakes of their animated classics in the 90s. Think 101 Dalmatians, for example. But the first one of these to really hit it big was 2010's Alice in Wonderland. If you go back and watch that one, you'll realize that it's not really a remake. It's more like a pseudo-sequel to the original book by Lewis Carroll. And that's because this was never pitched as a remake. This was actually the pet project of a Disney exec who wanted a new take on the book directed by Tim Burton. The fact that it also happened to share a name and source material with a Disney classic was pure serendipitous coincidence. But when Alice blew up and made over $1 billion, well, Disney head honcho Bob Iger saw dollar signs and decided they could reimagine all of their old properties. Script issues and scheduling conflicts made the follow-up Maleficent way more of a remake than the mostly original Alice. But that movie did well, and thus the trend continued until we got here, with a basically shot-for-shot remake of movies like How to Train Your Dragon. But why did this trend get started? Why did these movies get so...
Well, here's the thing with How to Train Your Dragon. It decently looks good in the style. Also, I'm kind of just really excited for that movie. I'm gonna watch it, most likely.
successful? Well, I believe there's a couple of reasons for that. Some that affect a very small number of people, and some that affect a lot of people. For our purposes today, I'm going to be calling this a reverse funnel. Some might call that a pyramid, but I'm not. Anyway, at the top of this reverse funnel are the reasons that will affect the smallest number of people, and as we move down the funnel, more and more people are going to get drawn into the vortex of live-action remakes and the money they make. So, what's at the top of this reverse funnel? Serving the unserved. So I want to start this off with a little story. I remember in like 2018 or whatever, when I was in my mid-20s, a group of my friends and I were going to go watch Captain Marvel, and in front of us, there was like an entire row of girls that must have been teenagers, maybe like freshmen in high school. Anyway, in the previews, a trailer for Frozen 2 started playing, and that entire row of girls suddenly sat bolt upright in their chairs, excited for this trailer. I even heard a couple of them whispering like, "Oh my god," and "Oh, that looks super cool." That was a really eye-opening experience for me as an appreciator of film, and I loved that these girls were getting excited for cinema, but that's also a big part of what's at play here. Tell me, how many really big budget films, think like Marvel or Star Wars level movies, can you name that are aimed specifically at women? They exist, don't get me wrong, but how many exist? You have stuff like Barbie, sure, but what else? And how many of them are actually these live action remakes? See, that is part of the strategy here, and the narrowest part of this reverse funnel. A lot of these live-action remakes are female-focused, both in terms of their characters, but also the audience that the filmmakers want to attract. And that isn't just me saying that. While explaining their reasoning for the Beauty and the Beast adaptation, a Disney executive said that while there are a lot of big live-action films aimed generally at a male audience, there aren't as many aimed at a female audience. Quote, "Marvel has Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. We have Cinderella, Snow White, and Belle. Pairing those characters with great live-action talent and technology just seemed a smart way to go." Basically, there was a gap in the market. There were plenty of live-action blockbusters made with men in mind, but very few with women. And if they actually served that audience, Disney could find success. And you know what? They were right. Beauty and the Beast's opening weekend ended at $170 million in the North American box office and $350 million worldwide. 60% of that massive audience was female, while that jumps to 72% when you just account for opening day. And Beauty and the Beast isn't alone here. Going backwards to that very first of these remakes, 55% of ticket buyers for Alice in Wonderland opening weekend were women. 53% and 54% respectively of people who watched the female-focused Hunger Games films Mockingjay Part 1 and Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes were women, while a massive 80% of the audience for the Twilight sequel New Moon were also women. And just looking at these last couple of months at the live-action movies that launched recently, 56% of the opening weekend tickets for How to Train Your Dragon were bought by women, and that number jumps to 63% for Lilo and Stitch. I could go on and on, but you get the idea. With all of this in mind, all of a sudden, a lot of the choices Disney made with their live-action remakes make a lot more sense, don't they? This is why there was such a big focus early on with the princess movies like Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast, or with female leads like Alice and Maleficent. They are specifically serving an underserved audience and, a lot of the time, reaping the rewards because
they make
of it.
a lot more
that being said, that can't account for all of the success that these movies have, leading us to the next tier of our reverse funnel: nostalgia cycles. So years before the plague, I was talking with a friend about YouTube analytics. Yes, we are very cool. And he and I noticed that the popularity of certain games or movies or whatever kind of followed a cycle. We noticed that a lot of what was popular on YouTube in like 2012, 2013 were games popular in the mid to late 90s. Super Mario 64 and Pokemon and Ocarina of Time and Banjo-Kazooie, you know, that sort of stuff. But as time went on, so did what was popular, more into games from the early to mid-2000s. It was really rough, kind of back in the napkin math back then, but basically it seemed like things that were released 17 years ago found popularity again in online spaces. We dubbed this the nostalgia cycle, and it's held pretty true ever since. Looking back, I think 17 years was a little bit too limiting. It's probably a little closer to like a 7-year span from around that long ago, and that was also very YouTube specific based on what was working on the platform, which in and of itself is completely unrecognizable to what it was back then. But regardless, the thought of that nostalgia cycle is definitely also at play here. The long and short of it is that people like what's familiar. Yes, sometimes they want something new and exciting, but there's also a craving to see your favorite characters go on an adventure, or to return to a comfort world and explore it again. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be with a new piece of media. I mean, how many people rewatch The Office or Lord of the Rings every year? But it can be with a new piece of media. I think back to those girls getting excited about Frozen 2 in the movie theater. Around that time, they would have been children when that first Frozen movie came out and were absolutely the target demographic for that movie's sequel. So, okay, let's then fast forward, say, 10 years. Those same girls are now adult women, and if Disney did a live-action remake of Frozen, well, they might be first in line, right? Those very same girls who grew up with Frozen have a chance to relive that nostalgia with a new coat of paint. And again, this isn't just me saying that, the numbers also bear this out. 65% of the people who saw How to Train Your Dragon opening weekend were 35 years old or younger, people who would have been 20 at the oldest when that first movie came out. So, a lot of kids who grew up with that animated film came out to see the new one. Same with Lilo and Stitch, which had an insane 79% under 35 audience, people who would have been 12 at the oldest when that original came out. If I had to hazard a guess, this is also probably why some remakes do better than others. It's not a clean one-to-one comparison, obviously, but there is a slight trend of the live-action remakes based on films made during or after the Disney Renaissance doing better at the box office than those that weren't. I'm thinking of Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and Lilo and Stitch, all those standouts. That's not to say that remakes of older films can't do well, like think Alice in Wonderland or Maleficent, or that it's a guaranteed success to adapt a Renaissance film. I mean, just look at Mulan, though that also had COVID to deal with, but anyway. Regardless, there is definitely a nostalgic contributing factor going on here, and probably a big reason why movies based on ancient titles like Snow White didn't land with audiences. But while nostalgia is a powerful marketing tool, it's not the only reason these remakes can be successful. After all, eventually, all of the people who have that nostalgia aren't going to be around anymore, and you need new fans to bring in new audiences. And, well, something else that these nostalgia cycles create, and the final tier of our reverse funnel, the next generation. By bringing these IP back and remaking them at strategic points in time, there's a lot of potential for these movie studios to create cross-generational fans here. Here, let me explain. The best example of this I can think of is actually Star Wars. That's not a live-action remake, I realize, but I think it's just great to give you an example of what I mean. The very first Star Wars released in 1977, and if you were like 8 when it released and you fell in love with it, well, then you would have been around 30 when the prequel started up in 1999. Just old enough to have maybe started your own family and take your kids to see Star Wars. And if that kid was 8 when the prequel started in 1999, they would have been around 24 when the sequel started in 2015. A little bit younger, but that's still in the sweet spot to potentially have started a family of their own and start this generational cycle all over again. The same thing applies here with these live-action remakes, maybe even more so because the Disney and DreamWorks animated movies appeal to a way wider audience than Star Wars does. I'm 31, turning 32 next month, basically on the younger end of millennial, and pretty much everyone I knew in my generation growing up had seen and loved Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, Mulan, Beauty and the Beast, all that jazz. Well, us millennials are now at the age where we've started to have those families, some with children old enough to go and check out these live-action remakes. All of a sudden, that's a great night out for a family and an opportunity for parents to bond with their kids. Oh, you liked the new Aladdin movie, son? Well, here are 3 more on Disney Plus that I grew up watching. To Disney, this is creating an entirely new generation of fans that will keep watching these sequels, extending the life of their IP and their versions of these fairy tales again and again and again. And at least anecdotally, I can confirm that this is happening. Every time I've gone to a theater over the past few weeks, I've seen parents around my age with small kids dressed up to see Lilo and Stitch, or with toothless plushies in an absolutely packed showtime. Parents loved it, the kids loved it, and you're sure as hell Disney and Universal loved it. But do you know what these new cross-generational families of fans will do that's maybe even more important to these corporate execs than watching old movies or going to see new ones? They buy toys, they wear merch, they go to theme parks, and they spend a lot of money doing so. Do you think it's a happy coincidence that Universal Studios opened up a new park and attractions based on How to Train Your Dragon at Universal Orlando just in time for the new movie to come out? Or that Stitch seems to be all over the Disney parks again? These remakes start cycles. Just like the original animated films caused kids to go crazy for all of the Disney Renaissance merch and parks and whatever, these remakes are doing the same for their kids. And in another 20, 30 years, we'll probably see this cycle start anew with another wave of these. But even then, here's the twist of it all. They've always been making these. While, yes, live-action remakes of animated films is a relatively new phenomenon outside of a few exceptions, in one way or another, movie studios have kind of always been doing remakes. Sort of. The actual phrase for these things is live-action adaptation, and adaptation has been a huge part of Hollywood for its entire history. Like, there are tons of movies, pillars of cinematic culture that I bet you didn't realize were actually adaptations. Die Hard, Psycho, Jaws, Forrest Gump, Shawshank Redemption, Good Goodfellas, Blade Runner, Planet of the Apes, Jurassic Park, Casablanca, The Godfather? All of them are adaptations of books or plays or whatever. Now, I want to be clear, it is absolutely the case that there used to be more completely original films on the market. Stuff like Star Wars or The Matrix or Titanic or whatever. I'd also argue that a lot of these original films were in a mid-budget range of stuff like romantic comedies or thrillers that have kind of disappeared in today's market, but that's a theory for another day. And even then, some of the original stuff like Star Wars, The Matrix, and Titanic took a lot of inspiration from other works or real-life events. Like, sure, they weren't one-to-one adaptations and didn't take the names, and don't get me wrong, they were able to take these things in a wildly unique direction, but a lot of the same elements for a remake are there in one way or another. But we're getting off track. Regardless, if you sit down and think about this, it does make sense. Books, plays, fairy tales, they were all the culturally dominant thing in the 20th century and before. Most everyone read or went to a theater or told their kids fairy tales or whatever. Along with music or just good old conversation, it was the most widely available form of traditional entertainment in the world. It makes sense that when films started getting made, that they'd adapt these stories that people knew and already enjoyed. And, well, times have changed, and so has the media that people consume. Comic books became more popular in the 80s and 90s, so what did we start seeing in the 90s and 2000s? Movies that are adaptations of comic books, and I don't just mean Batman, Iron Man, and Spider-Man. Wanted, Men in Black, Push, 30 Days of Night, Blue is the Warmest Color, Cowboys and Aliens, A History of Violence, all were comic book adaptations. Naturally, as we continue to move forward, it makes sense that these animated films, beloved by generations, would be adapted next. It also doesn't hurt that technology has finally caught up to animation too. In the past, a lot of what was done in animation was simply impossible to film for real. But with the advent of CGI and just how darn good it's getting these days, that limitation is gone. Thus, while we have a fully CG animated, quote-unquote, live-action Lion King. But hear me now and quote me later, don't be surprised when it goes even further beyond that. I've been saying this privately for years, but I also expect that we're gonna see way more adaptations of video games and anime in the coming decades, because that's what's culturally relevant entertainment.
Oh yes, that's definitely gonna happen, and I'm gonna be pretty excited when that happens. Because there's a lot of video games that, like, deserve something, like some sort of movie, or like even just like an anime or something, I don't know. There's so much potential there.
These days. Those are the new wells of IP to tap into. We've already seen this start to kind of come to fruition with stuff like One Piece, The Last of Us, and the Super Mario Brothers movie, but the studios are just like outright admitting it too. The studio, A24, is currently working on adaptations of both Elden Ring and Death Stranding, and a rep for the studio went as far as to say that they're pivoting towards gaming IP and that they're, quote, the future of new franchises. So what's the takeaway here? What can we as lovers of film actually do here? Well, even with failures like Snow White, we're going to keep seeing these live-action remakes. Yes, because people go see them and they make money, but also because they legitimately fill a space in the market. I don't love that, but it's the truth. Don't be surprised when Universal looks at the success of How to Train Your Dragon and wind up a new live-action Shrek or Despicable Me. Or when Disney churns out a Frozen remake, or starts spinning on that Tangled adaptation again, or if they assign Pixar to create a live-action Toy Story and Monsters, Inc. If you don't want these to come out, vote with your dollar, just like we all did with Snow White. But even then, something else we can try to do is steer these remakes towards movies and franchises that could actually use it. There are tons of underappreciated animated films in the back catalogs here that could use a fresh coat of paint with a truly creative visionary at the helm. Some examples? Well, I truly believe that a remake of Atlantis: The Lost Empire could become a breakout success. It's a super unique world with a very engaging premise that they could play as an adventure mystery. The same could be said for Treasure Planet, or if they're really desperate, they could always remake Gargoyles. At least I'd go to see that one. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut. Up next on Film.
No, I did not mean to do that. Who are you? I seem to always click in the right spot to where I click to the next video. Which is super... Okay, I'm getting an ad. Okay, well, I'll wrap this up real quick then. Oh yeah, make sure... I'm forgetting what I'm meant to do because I got jump scared by an ad. Make sure to like and subscribe to Film Theorist and myself, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.